A covert mission betrayed. A fall that should have killed her. They erased her name and left her for dead 300 miles behind enemy lines. They thought the story was over. It was just the beginning. The world vanished in a concussion of fire and sound. One moment, Captain Ava Rostova was moving through the moonless scrub of the Zagros Mountains. The next, the explosion lifted her like a doll. It hurled her into the abyss, the shriek of twisted metal chasing her down. Her body was a pinball, crashing through a lattice of jagged branches. Each impact was a fresh agony, a lightning strike to her ribs, her shoulder, her skull. She finally slammed into the rocky floor of a ravine with a wet, sickening crack. Her left leg twisted beneath her, bending at an angle that wasn't just wrong, it was impossible. Above, the night was filled with the crunch of boots on gravel. Cold, clipped voices cut through the ringing in her ears, calling out coordinates. It was the sound of a professional kill team, methodical and calm, sweeping the area for survivors. For her. Ava forced herself into absolute stillness, a statue of pain. A warm river of blood trickled from a gash on her scalp, pooling on the cold stone beneath her cheek. She focused on her breathing, slowing her heart, fighting the darkness that clawed at the edges of her vision. "Check the ravine," a voice commanded, laced with a cold, corporate accent. Beams from powerful flashlights sliced through the darkness above, painting strobing patterns on the rock face opposite her. Ava squeezed her eyes shut, playing dead, her mind screaming. A beam passed directly over her, illuminating her still form for a fraction of a second. "Just rocks and debris down there," a second voice reported. "If she took a fall that far, she's paced anyway." "Argus wants confirmation," the first voice insisted. "All 3 bodies. We have the 2 males. The blast likely scattered her across half the forest. She's gone. Tell Argus the asset is neutralized." Argus. The name echoed in the shattered ruin of her mind. Director Marcus Thorne. The man who had personally briefed her team on this simple reconnaissance mission. The man who had looked her in the eye and wished her luck. The voices receded, the boot falls fading as the kill team moved on. But Ava remained frozen, a prisoner of pain and betrayal, for what felt like an eternity. When she finally dared to shift her weight, a white-hot poker of agony shot from her femur, and she had to bite down hard on the sleeve of her tactical jacket to swallow a scream. As the first hint of dawn bled across the horizon, the horrifying reality of her situation settled in. Her team was dead. Her own government had set her up. She was 300 miles inside hostile territory with a shattered leg, a concussion, and no comms. The radio was a mangled wreck, her GPS a spiderweb of cracked glass. According to the mission parameters, she didn't officially exist. Captain Ava Rostova had been erased, abandoned by the very nation she'd sworn an oath to defend. But as she began to drag herself deeper into the shadows of the ravine, one thought burned through the fog of pain and despair. Argus had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed she was dead. She was very much alive. And now, she knew the truth. The only question was whether she could survive long enough to make him regret it. Ava's first priority was the blinding pain. Her femur was not just broken, it was splintered. She could feel the shards grinding together with every agonizing inch she dragged herself. The gash on her head was a sticky, matted mess that was already attracting flies. But the real danger wasn't her injuries. It was the systematic hunt that began with the rising sun. She heard them before she saw them. The methodical sweep of boots through the underbrush, the sharp crackle of radios, the occasional, eager bark of tracking dogs. From her hiding spot beneath a massive, fallen log, Ava watched through a gap in the rotting wood as a 6-man team moved through the ravine. These weren't local militia. They moved with the fluid precision of Tier 1 operators, their eyes checking every shadow, every crevice where a body might have landed. "Command, this is Hunter 3, the team leader spoke into his radio, his voice a low growl. No sign of the target in Grid 7. Moving to Grid 8. Over. The voice that crackled back made Ava's blood run cold. It was Thorn. Argus himself. "Keep searching," Thorn's voice commanded, devoid of any emotion. "The bounty goes to whoever brings me proof of death." 20,000. American. $20,000. The implication hit her like a physical blow. Thorn wasn't just eliminating a witness. He was turning her death into a for-profit enterprise, a sick competition. Every mercenary, bounty hunter, and desperate local within a 100-mile radius would now be her executioner. After the search team passed, Ava forced herself to think. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She clinically assessed her situation. Broken femur, concussion, multiple lacerations, and the first telltale signs of infection creeping into her head wound. Her gear was mostly gone, leaving her with a combat knife, half a canteen of water, and her wits. But she had advantages her hunters didn't know about. Ava had grown up in the rugged mountains of Colorado, taught survival by her grandfather, a Vietnam vet who believed the wilderness was the ultimate teacher. More importantly, she'd spent 3 years in psychological operations. She knew how to think like the enemy, anticipate their moves, and turn their strengths into weaknesses. The first rule of survival behind enemy lines: become invisible. Ava spent the next 2 days doing just that. She learned the patterns of her hunters. They searched in grids during daylight. They used the main roads for transport, setting up checkpoints at bridges and crossroads. And most crucially, they were overconfident. They were hunting a wounded woman, and their arrogance made them predictable. On the third night, she made her move. She'd been observing a 2-man patrol that regularly swept a nearby river valley. They always stopped at the same abandoned farmhouse to smoke and check in. She waited until they were relaxed, their rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders. The first guard never saw her coming. A shadow detaching from other shadows. Her knife found a vulnerable gap between his helmet and body armor with practiced efficiency. He dropped without a sound. The second guard had just enough time to register his partner's absence before Ava's arm locked around his throat from behind. She held the chokehold until he went limp, then gently lowered him to the ground. She worked quickly, her hands searching their gear. Jackpot. A full medical kit, including precious antibiotics and 2 syrettes of morphine. A detailed map marking their search grids and patrol routes. And most valuable of all, a radio, already tuned to the hunter's frequency. As she cleaned and dressed her wounds with proper medical supplies, the morphine dulling the worst of the pain, Ava listened to the chatter. The hunters were getting frustrated. 3 days had yielded nothing. But Thorn's voice kept pushing them, a phantom master promising more money. "She's out there," Argus insisted during one transmission. "American Special Forces don't die easy. Find her." A grim smile touched Ava's lips as she applied antibiotic ointment to her scalp. Thorn was right about one thing. She wouldn't die easy. But he'd made a fatal error in underestimating exactly how hard she would fight to stay alive. Over the following week, Ava Rostova ceased to be the hunted. She became the ghost of the Zagros Mountains. The stolen radio was her lifeline and her weapon. She tracked patrol movements, always staying one step ahead. When they swept the eastern valley, she was already moving through the western ridges. When they set up roadblocks on the main roads, she was navigating ancient goat trails high in the mountains. But survival wasn't enough. She needed leverage. She needed a way to strike back. Her opportunity came in a crackled, encrypted transmission she painstakingly decoded. Argus himself was coming to the area. A high-value meeting to coordinate the expanded search, bringing in local warlords who controlled the network of bounty hunters. He would be staying at a fortified compound just outside the regional capital. Ava spent 2 days conducting reconnaissance. The compound was a fortress, surrounded by razor wire and watchtowers. But she found a flaw, an oversight born of arrogance. A wide drainage culvert, used for irrigation before the war, ran directly beneath the perimeter fence. On a moonless night, she began her infiltration. She crawled through 50 yards of filthy, stagnant water and debris. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony up her broken leg, but the morphine she'd carefully rationed kept the pain from overwhelming her. This was not a mission of assassination, that would be suicide. This was an intelligence op. She improvised a listening device from components in the stolen radio, her fingers working with desperate precision. She planted the bug near the main building's ventilation system, a spot where voices from inside would be carried out. Then she retreated back into the darkness. Huddled in a damp, hidden crevice, she listened. What she overheard was far worse than a simple betrayal. "The Americans are getting too close to our operation," Thorne was saying to someone whose voice she didn't recognize. That intelligence team stumbled onto the drone schematics. "We had to eliminate them before they reported back." A pause. "And the woman, Rostova?" "Still alive, apparently." "It doesn't matter," Thorne replied, his voice dripping with contempt. "Even if she makes it home, who's going to believe a dead woman's story?" According to official records, Captain Ava Rostova died in a helicopter crash 3 weeks ago. We even held a memorial service. Her flag was presented to her grieving parents. The words hit Ava like ice water. Her blood froze in her veins. She wasn't just fighting for survival or revenge. She was fighting to prove she even existed. Thorne had erased her so completely that even if she walked onto a US base, she'd be a ghost, a phantom telling a story that officially never happened. But as she crawled back through the stinking covert, a new feeling sparked within her, hope. She had it. Recorded proof of Thorne's treachery. The real reason her team was murdered, they had discovered he was selling advanced, swarm, drone technology. More importantly, she'd learned something crucial. Argus was afraid. Afraid enough to mobilize an army. Afraid enough to risk a personal visit to this backwater region. That meant her evidence was powerful. That meant she could burn his world to the ground. Captain Ava Rostova might be officially dead. But dead women have certain advantages. They move without leaving traces. They strike without being suspected. And most importantly, they have nothing left to lose. The hunt was about to change direction. 2 weeks of playing cat and mouse had taken their toll. The infection in her leg had returned with a vengeance, a raging fire that the last of the stolen antibiotics couldn't quench. A fever had taken hold, blurring the edges of the world, making her hallucinate conversations with her dead teammates. Her improvised splint was failing. She was dying, and she knew it. That's when she stumbled, quite literally, into Alara Vasha's life. Ava had been trying to reach an abandoned medical clinic she'd spotted on her map when her leg finally gave out. She collapsed in the courtyard of what she thought was another derelict building, only to find herself staring up at the weathered face of a middle-aged woman. The woman held a rusty AK-47, not with fear, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew its every mechanism. "American," Alara said, her English accented but clear. Her dark, intelligent eyes scanned Ava's fevered face. "You are the ghost they hunt." Ava's hand moved instinctively for her knife, but Alara just shook her head. "If I wanted the bounty, you would already be dead. My son, Nikolai, was 17 when Thorne's men killed him for refusing to join their network. You are the enemy of my enemy." Over the next 3 days, as Alara nursed her back from the brink of death with local remedies and a firm, practiced hand, Ava learned everything. There was a network operating in the region, a secret route to safety called the Shepherd's Path. It wasn't for escaped slaves, but for trapped soldiers, journalists, and aid workers caught behind the lines. But their methods were unconventional. "You cannot move as a soldier anymore," Alara explained, changing Ava's bandages. "Thorne has your photograph in every village, at every checkpoint. But a pregnant refugee woman, nobody looks twice at a pregnant refugee woman." The disguise was brilliant in its simplicity. Alara's network had perfected the art of hiding people in plain sight. Ava would pose as Alara's pregnant niece, Fatima, fleeing an abusive husband. A padded belly would conceal a weapon and her intelligence files, while her condition would explain any awkward limp from her healing leg. But first, Alara said, producing a bottle of black hair dye, we make Ava Rostova disappear completely. The transformation was total. Ava's blonde hair became a raven black. Her eyebrows were darkened, her skin tone adjusted with makeup that could withstand close scrutiny. Alara even taught her how to walk differently, the careful, protective gait of a woman in her third trimester. Remember, Alara coached, you are Fatima. You are scared, tired, and you speak only when spoken to. And you never, ever make eye contact with soldiers. The first test came with terrifying speed. Thorne's men raided the neighborhood the next morning, going door to door with Ava's photo. When they knocked, Ava was huddled in a corner, wearing a hijab and cradling her fake belly, feigning tears as Alara loudly berated her for bringing shame upon the family. The soldiers barely gave her a second glance. But the real trials lay ahead. Each safe house on the shepherd's path brought new challenges. In a border town, she had to pose as a working girl in a brothel while one of Thorne's lieutenants conducted an inspection, her heart pounding as his gaze lingered on her for an eternity. At a city morgue, she had to lie perfectly still among actual corpses during a surprise raid, controlling her breathing while rats scurried across her body. At a children's school run by the network, she taught English to the sons and daughters of enemy officers, their fathers' voices echoing in the hallway as they discussed the ongoing hunt for the American terrorist. The network also brought unexpected allies, a doctor who treated her leg properly, a taxi driver who smuggled intelligence through checkpoints. Even some of Thorne's own men, disgusted with hunting a wounded woman for money, secretly fed information to the path. The most dangerous moment came at a sprawling refugee camp near the border, her final stop before freedom. She'd been there for 3 days when Alara arrived with devastating news. Thorne had captured one of their contacts. They are coming, Alara whispered urgently. Tonight. He talked. But as they prepared to flee, Ava overheard a conversation that changed everything. A group of refugees was discussing rumors of a massive offensive Thorne was planning. He was using the hunt for her as a cover to position his forces for a coordinated attack that would wipe out 3 refugee camps and a UN aid station. Thousands of innocent people would die. We have to warn them, Ava told Alara, her voice tight. Impossible. We barely have time to save ourselves. Ava looked around the camp, at the children playing between the tents, at the families who had already lost everything. They would pay the price for her war. Then we don't run, Ava said quietly, a cold resolve hardening within her. We fight. Alara stared at her, a long, searching look in her eyes. Then, she slowly nodded. My Nikolai would have liked you. He also believed some things are worth dying for. As Thorne's forces began to encircle the camp in the pre-dawn darkness, Ava Rostova prepared for the most important battle of her life. She was no longer just fighting for her own survival. She was fighting for the lives of every person Thorne's greed had endangered. The shepherd's path was about to become an underground army. The attack began at 0300 hours with the systematic cutting of communication lines. From her position in the camp's medical tent, Ava watched through night vision binoculars. 67 days behind enemy lines had taught her to read tactical movements like a book. This wasn't a raid. It was a massacre in the making. How many? Alara whispered beside her, clutching the old rifle that had belonged to her son. 200, maybe more, Ava replied, her voice grim. Heavy weapons, coordinated positions. They're not planning to take prisoners. The camp held over 800 people. Phoenix intended to eliminate them all and blame it on a terrorist attack, using her presence as the justification. But Ava had spent the last 3 days preparing. The shepherd's path had become a resistance cell. Weapons were cached throughout the camp, escape routes were mapped, and a hidden communication network was active. Dr. Youssef, report, Ava spoke into their improvised radio network. Medical station secure, the doctor's voice came back. Families are in the underground shelters. We're ready. Malik, are the vehicles in position? Ready at the extraction points. But Ava, the children. I know, Ava's voice was steady, but her hand shook as she checked her weapon. The hardest part of the plan was also the most crucial. Someone had to stay behind to coordinate the defense, to be the bait that kept Thorne's attention focused on the camp while the civilians escaped. That someone was her. The first mortar shell shattered the silence, and the bombardment began. The underground shelters held, but not forever. Phase 1, execute. Ava commanded. Across the camp, her improvised army sprang into action. Teachers, doctors, mechanics, mothers, they fought with the desperation of people protecting their homes and their children. Malik's taxi drivers became a mobile strike force, hitting Thorne's supply lines. Dr. Yusef's team became combat medics. But the real genius of Ava's plan was intelligence warfare. She had studied Thorne's communication patterns. Now, she began her psychological assault. Argus, this is Valkyrie, she broadcast on his command frequency, using the call sign her own team had given her. You want me? Come and get me. The response was immediate and furious. Rostova. I should have known you were too stubborn to die quietly. Funny thing about being officially dead, Ava replied, watching through her scope as Thorne's forces hesitated, confused. It gives you certain freedoms. Like the freedom to record every conversation you've had for the past month. The silence on the radio told her everything. He knew she had the evidence. You're bluffing, Thorne finally snarled. Am I? Ava smiled grimly as she triggered the next phase. Explosions erupted from behind Thorne's lines, his own ammunition depot, destroyed by charges Malik had planted days earlier. In the ensuing chaos, her people struck like ghosts. Argus, Ava broadcast again. I want you to listen very carefully. She played the recording she'd made at his compound, his own voice, discussing the betrayal, the drone technology, the plan to eliminate witnesses. But she wasn't just broadcasting to him. She was transmitting on every frequency she could access, military channels, news networks, civilian radio. The world was now listening. You bastard! Thorne screamed. You've just signed the death warrant for every person in that camp. Maybe, Ava admitted. But I've also signed yours. The final assault began with a fury that shook the ground. Thorne, exposed and enraged, threw everything he had at the camp. But Ava had one last card to play. She activated the emergency beacon she'd been saving for 67 days. Not to call for rescue, but to paint the camp as a target for friendly forces. Her own military, alerted by the broadcasted evidence, had been mobilizing. The sky soon filled with the thunder of American helicopters. They arrived just as Thorne's forces breached the camp perimeter. Ava found herself caught in the crossfire of her own rescue. She almost made it. A sniper's bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into a pile of rubble. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw him, Argus. Marcus Thorne himself, striding towards her, his sidearm drawn, his face a mask of pure hatred. 67 days, he seethed, standing over her. You should have stayed dead. Probably, Ava gasped, blood pouring from her arm. But then you'd never have learned the most important lesson. Which is? Ava smiled, her hand moving to the detonator she'd been carrying since the siege began. Never corner a ghost unless you're prepared to join her. The explosion took out the entire command post. Ava was thrown clear, her body broken but alive, as American forces swarmed in and secured the camp. When she woke up 3 days later in a military hospital, she learned the full scope of what she had accomplished. Thorne's network was dismantled. The drone technology was recovered. And the 800 civilians in the refugee camp had survived. Every single one. They're recommending you for the Medal of Honor, her commanding officer told her. "What about my team?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Do their families know the truth?" "They know," he said gently. "Their names have been cleared. They're heroes." Ava finally allowed herself to feel something other than the burning need for survival. Her teammates could rest in peace. The truth had come home. Her war wasn't over. There were others like Thorn, and more people trapped behind enemy lines. But Captain Ava Rostova had walked out of hell once. The ghost had become a guardian. And her watch was just beginning. What Ava endured is a testament to the human spirit. If you were in her shoes, what would have been the hardest part to overcome? The betrayal, the injuries, or the moral choice at the end? Let us know in the comments below. And please, always show respect to one another in the discussion. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories of survival.